attempt to recollect who was on the Titanic before it unfortunately went under the water. It is quite difficult, right? Jack and Rose will be pondering, all things considered, despite the fact that Leo's character was not. Truth be told, on board the doomed boat was the genuine Jack. His story is so convincing and tragic, as we found in the cinema. John's discourse, in the psyche of the brilliant heir to, who was a 17-year-old when the Titanic cruised in 1912. Dissimilar to in the film is Jack, that he's from an extremely affluent family. This is intended to be, he'd like to enjoy the advantage of 5-star, then the over-the-deck. Furthermore, regardless of whether every one of the boats that, straightforwardly, when the boat hits an icy mass, heir got an opportunity to live longer. It's for Leo. In the second-rate class, wherein Jack was shot, it was only 710 travelers. Tragically, just 174 individuals endured the sinking, in the top of the line, and, despite what might be expected, 199 held by 319 travelers. This is an extremely striking contrast. James Cameron to film. Indeed, this is the second when Jack needs to separate the ways to the principal circle to discover where he is, and others, and in the third grade. Nonetheless, regardless of whether the scene isn't accurate, it is altogether anecdotal. It was a great deal of dramatization on board the stricken vessel. Furthermore, there, the center has gotten quite possibly the most frightening accounts of reality. In fact, Cameron, May, Ilham, heir, well, the boss was, in fact, the base of some of the characters of the people who are, in fact, to swim in it. Some of the survivors wrote of his harsh experiences in the interviews, and heir himself, as the author of his own test. The books were published in a separate form. Be that as it may, to comprehend the genuine history of the heirs the Titanic, Dawson's phony date, we need to take a gander at the occasions which caused the boat was unfortunately executed in the debacle. Indeed, the Titanic was dispatched in May 1911, however it isn't in its disastrous first journey in about a year or so later. Notwithstanding, to comprehend the genuine history of the heirs the Titanic, similar to Dawson's anecdotal story, we need to take a gander at the occasions which caused the boat was lamentably executed in the fiasco. Truth be told, the Titanic was dispatched in May 1911. Regardless of that, they have likewise been awful with the flight. It very well may be supposed to be in a year or so later. Be that as it may, the Titanic was actually an extremely lovely boat. It's the greatest boat on the planet. Liner, it was only a supernatural occurrence of designing. It is treated as the final say regarding extravagance, at any rate for the 5-star travelers. Heir might have been from a special menu will be served on April 14, 1912. This is the remainder of the food on the boat before the Titanic hit the ice sheet. The menu incorporated a kid, broiled duck, foie gras, and, most importantly, a peach jam is greenish-yellow. Delightful. Individuals in the second-rate class, evidently, didn't eat also, in spite of the way that they were in the doing of good, and the product of it. That in itself was an improvement. A large number of different boats, with the travelers having a lower societal position, are frequently needed to eat themselves. Notwithstanding, there was just one bloom, concerning individuals, which is the least expensive seats the Titanic, all of 710 individuals, just 2 of the showers. In any case, before any of the second-rate class appreciate the hamburger, the Titanic must be streaming. Southampton was picked as the port of takeoff, and it was only a fast bounce across the English Channel to the following stop of the French city of Cherbourg. The last objective is, obviously, it must be in New York City. What's more, Jack, in this film, heir and landed abroad, in Southampton. However, he's not alone. In his 1940 book, The Survivor's Story, he stated, "My dad, John Beath Heir, the second VP of the Pennsylvania Railroad, to my mother, Marion Longstreth Morris Heir, a young lady by my mom, Margaret Fleming, and I am the organization and cruise for the top of the line in Southampton. Ayer will be recalled that he was excited. The records are huge. You can do. I was alluding to, the bungalow is nearby my dad's and mom's quarters, on the left half of the sea deck, he said, and, obviously, the 17-year-old I was, someplace on the boat. However, he didn't realize that the excursion would prop the misfortune. By and large, the Ayer might have wanted that it had not been to the Titanic. He may likewise have known that his family was leaving the boat at Queenstown Airport. This is the last port of call prior to intersection the Atlantic Sea. 7 individuals are, truth be told, halfway once again into town, and we can possibly envision how cheerful they were the point at which they learned of the sinking of the Titanic. Horrible destiny. In any case, there is one other wind to the story. Do you know what Titanic had in fact? It is one of the passengers named J. Dawson. His name is Joseph, not Jack, and, unfortunately, he broke out after the ship sank. Today, he is best known for his gravestone in the Fairview Lawn Cemetery in Halifax, Canada. Joseph was Irish, and he was only 23 years old, and he died, the Ada entry into service, as the cutting of the Titanic, just a few days prior to her maiden voyage. This meant that he was forced to carry the coal, and the stokers, which is fed to the furnaces of the deep dark's mouth as you can, tomorrow's name, as they hold the charcoal properly stacked, so that the ship stays in the shape or level. Of course, this is a hard and dirty job. Keep in mind that, even Joseph, were in fact, free for the time being, and the data, there is nothing. That is, his salvation. At the point when Joseph was in the long run pulled from the chilly ocean, he was essentially known as Body 227. Luckily, the National Sailors and Firemen's Union card stowed in one of his pockets before long uncovered his personality. Almost certainly, when he showed up on the liner's deck, the entirety of the rafts had effectively been dispatched. That left him with no decision except for to jump into the ocean. A freezing bad dream that not very many endure. This implies the two J. Dawsons, the genuine Joseph and the anecdotal Jack, both met their finishes in the unforgiving waters of the Atlantic. However, for some odd reason, they share more than that for all intents and purpose. Both Joseph and Jack came from humble foundations. They were likewise close in age. Jack was, as far as anyone knows, brought into the world in 1892, while Joseph showed up into the world in 1894. Also, obviously, similar to Joseph, Jack wound up on the Titanic. Be that as it may, there's in any event one major contrast between the two J. Dawsons. In this film, Jack is on board the Titanic as a traveler. His story is that he'd won second-rate class entry in a poker game in the blink of an eye before the liner set forth from Southampton. Joseph, then again, was a group part, given the mind-blowing ties between the two youngsters. However, it's no big surprise that some people have gotten confounded. Indeed, after Titanic was delivered in 1997, truth slammed into fiction, and Joseph's grave got significantly more consideration. Journalist Sinan Maloney, writing for the Encyclopedia Titanica website, and explained what had happened after Cameron's blockbuster movie. He wrote, "The contemporary generation of young women all wanted the little tramp, and allowed the tears to blur our perception of reality." Tombstone, the war, suddenly became the center of a teenager's feelings and emotions. In front of the stone, J. Dawson grew. The flowers, the stool is, yes, indeed, fans ought to send us the photographs by Leonardo DiCaprio and themselves, and to address the photograph to disallow smoking all through. Cooling, close to the precipice, says Maloney. They took the photographs, and extraordinary spices, recall that it was a left hand to get it. However, it is just characteristic that it is the awesome the new turn of events, as the lion, image of the pieces of the name of the first, put off from the catastrophe. Regardless, It showed that James Cameron, likewise, whether or not it very well might be the situation that this is an offer made to us, NSYNC, and the others that come after you, there, who is leaving the basic necessity to take it that way, which is a reasonable perspective on the occurrence, and it is presumably the dread of the one before the frail. And in the Atlantic Sea, around in the evening, all along, everything hushed up. Ayer wrote in his journal, "It is a dazzling evening, and spectacular. It was a month or somewhere in the vicinity, and that I had never seen the stars sparkle pleasantly. All of them showed that they were awesome. The sky was sparkling like valuable stones. It's him when it's evening, and we have been working professionally," he added. What's the gross incoherency? Ayer and saw that the ocean was just about as quiet as a factory lake. Then, glancing around at all of the scenes, he has clearly resigned to his lodge. Ayer said, "I went into the room and put on my nightgown, sitting tight for another incredible evening of rest, very much like the past four." However, that quiet was broken when, quickly before 12 p.m., when the fiasco had occurred. That is, the point at which the boat hits an icy mass. The impacts hit 6 tight openings along the boat's structure is sufficient to break the one portion of the waterproof empowered for them. Also, to the Titanic's destiny was fixed. When the ocean is spread and shut, the compartments that will immediately come. The boat was crazy, there. By and by, I felt that the man on the boat, he said, "I have 60 minutes." At 11:45 p.m., it was at that point going to head to sleep, when I out of nowhere felt a light rippling. I promptly understood that it had been gone to one side, and across the boundary. It resembled a hare that had been pushing it. Very quickly, he's halted. What's more, regardless of whether he could hear individuals running in the passages, Ayer completely saw how genuine the circumstance was. Everyone is content with it, however, without feeling that something genuine had occurred. I shouted to my dad and mom to go on the deck and watch the good times, where Ayer went up at hand, where he was quickly joined by his dad and I had been chosen out of the group. Then, at that point, in a discussion with one of the individuals from the team, as of late, interestingly, I have discovered that the boat had gone on a chunk of ice. It was as of now that he understood that the Titanic began to run down to one side of the board. Thomas Andrews, Harland and Wolff's boss, the boat's architect, disclosed to Thayer that horrible news. Reviewing the discussion, the enduring mate hence kept in touch with Andrew. He said he would not like to give us over an hour to get back up. We could barely handle it. Yet, in the event that he says as much, it should be valid. Obviously, Andrew was directly about to start suffocating, all things considered. Also, when the rescue of countries in preparation for the startup, the situation was chaotic. Ayer wrote, no one knew where his boat was, that there was no lifeboat drills. Anyway, his mom and his girlfriend, Margaret Fleming, and went to the left, as well as overseas, where the women were rescued. At this point, Ayers, along with another American, Milton Long, as he was known earlier in the evening, while Ayer, for a long time, and Ayers' father eventually joined Mrs. Thayer and his lover, the two young men, which was finally lost to the audience. This is the last time that Ayers going to see his father. Rescue lander looked scary, unstable, and Ayer believed that the capsize was quite likely. In the chaos, it was decided that the board of directors of the last two boats on the side of the ship, and when they were released, it's really every man for himself, Ayer said in the book. And, as they scramble for places on the planet, to the last lifeboat to be stepped up, someone fired several shots into the air, only adding to the general atmosphere of anarchy. At the same time, it was clear that this was a result of the Titanic. There was a need to rapidly master in the Atlantic Ocean, most likely, the fact that it was close to 1:50 in the AM, and probably have been in the last few minutes. The long time requirements, which I have been doing for a long time, and we must be aware of this. I had to jump out and grab a hold of the empty cabins. Air's lengthy self-control is a wet race that might lead to a scuba diving into 60 meters in cold water. Still, it was the most important thing, as Air said. In fact, it wasn't until about 2:15 in the early afternoon we saw that the water was in the upper deck, as the boat was on its way down at a high speed. The water came all the way to the outhouse. His nose was probably about 60 feet long. There was only one option left. They were the men who were about to jump out of the ocean. Air has been stated that this is a defining moment. We don't need to think, only to act. We shook hands and wished each other success. Like I said, go on, I'll be there in a little while. I took off my jacket and slipped it back into the boat. So he rolled their Axmany over the railing. Then, after the Air fell in the water, and never found him to be a priceless gift to an overturned lifeboat, along with the 4 or 5 others, that he clung to the word, the liquid shrine. From his vantage point, he could only look at the Titanic only carried enough lifeboats for the rest of the crew and the passengers, and from the hand of a roller coaster ride over the waves, an overturned lifeboat saved the Thair's life. No luck for a very long time, and Thair, a little bit bitter. And I remembered that the rescue of countries in order to get back to the rest of the water, he stated, if they were returned to their home country, several hundred people would have been saved. However, trust showed up similarly as daybreak broke. 2 of the Titanic's rafts went to the guide of Air and his allies, and his mom and her servant were in one of them. Then, at that point, after a few hours, they were all securely on board the RMS Carpathia. Along these lines, in contrast to Joseph or the anecdotal Jack, Air had figured out how to endure the sinking of the Titanic. He was remarkably fortunate. Of the roughly 2,200 who had been on board the liner, in excess of 1,500 had lost their lives. Thanks for watching our informations. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget our channel to subscribe.